I've never been the type who likes to stir up drama with the neighbors. As an architect working from home, all I really want is peace. Open the window in the morning for a breath of fresh air, sip coffee at noon, sketch a few designs in the afternoon. For me, the only drama in a day should come from a wrong line on a blueprint, not from people. But then, Deborah Winters showed up. Or rather, Karen showed up. To her face, everyone calls her Deborah. But behind her back, the whole neighborhood uses a name that tells you everything you need to know. Karen. You know the type. The half smile, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, always clutching a clipboard like it's her ultimate weapon. If Netflix ever needed a power-obsessed neighbor role, I swear they wouldn't even need auditions. Just hand the script to Deborah. When I bought my Craftsman house 3 years ago, life was peaceful. The HOA president at the time was a retired judge. Meetings were quick, decisions fair, and everyone was content. Then he moved to Florida, and Deborah saw her chance to seize the HOA throne. She ran on lofty promises like increasing property value and upholding community standards. Sounded like a congressional campaign, but in plain English it meant, get ready to live under the iron rule of HOA Karen. And me? I thought I'd be safe if I just followed the rules and kept to myself. Turns out, I was painfully naive. Let me spell it out for you. If you've never lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, homeowners association, just picture it as a miniature government, except all the power is in the hands of neighbors who are way too bored and way too power hungry. No cops, no courts. But trust me, a violation notice from the HOA can feel scarier than an actual traffic ticket. Back when the old retired judge was running things, everything was neat and simple. HOA meetings lasted 15 minutes tops. Financial report, lawn maintenance, done. No drama, no tension. Honestly, it was so dull, I sometimes wished something interesting would happen. But ever since Deborah, or rather Karen, took the throne, every meeting has turned into a public trial. She struts into the room with a binder thicker than a dictionary, and her voice booms like a prosecutor charging someone with international crimes. Instead of talking about repaving the road or repainting fences, she'll spend an hour dissecting why Mrs. Chin's trash bins were out on the curb 45 minutes late, or why the Johnsons still had their Christmas lights up on January 8th. I'd listen to the neighbors complain and just laugh to myself. I thought, no problem. I always follow the rules. I'll never end up in her crosshairs. I took out the trash on time, kept my grass the perfect length, even read through the entire 32-page covenant like a law student cramming for finals. I figured that was enough. But I forgot one thing. In the eyes of a Karen, nobody's ever perfect. And I never expected that the one thing I loved most about my backyard, a gorgeous maple tree, would become the excuse she needed to declare war on me. It was a perfect Saturday morning. I was in my home office, coffee in hand, shaded by the old maple tree in my backyard. The sound of its rustling leaves felt like background music for peace itself. I thought to myself, this is exactly why I bought this house. And then a piercing ruzz shattered the moment. At first, I figured a neighbor was fixing their fence, but when I walked to the window, I nearly dropped my coffee. Two men were standing in my yard, chainsaws roaring, while freshly cut branches from my maple lay scattered across the lawn. And who was standing there, arms crossed, clipboard in hand like some Hollywood action director? None other than Deborah Karen Winters. I bolted outside, yelling, "What the hell do you think you're doing in my yard?" Karen turned around, completely unfazed. Oversized sunglasses, overcast sky, and that trademark smirk. She said, matter-of-factly, "Your branches are hanging over the fence and dripping sap on my new patio set. According to Section 12, Clause 4, vegetation may not encroach on neighboring property." My jaw dropped. This is my tree, on my land. You can't just bring people in here without permission. That's called trespassing. She shrugged. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to enforce violations directly. I sent you a notice last week. You must have overlooked it. A notice? If it existed, it probably got buried under pizza coupons in my mailbox. I'd never seen it. I pulled out my phone, my voice low and sharp. If these guys take one more cut, I'm calling 911 and reporting trespassing. The air went tight as a wire. The workers exchanged glances, then killed the chainsaws. Karen's face flushed, not with shame, but with indignation at being challenged. Before storming off, she snapped. You'll be getting an official notice from me, and trust me, that tree of yours won't be standing much longer." I stood there, staring at the fallen branches, and I knew then the real war with HOA Karen had just begun. I thought after the Saturday morning fiasco, Deborah would be embarrassed enough to keep quiet. But no, turns out for a true Karen, failure is just an excuse to level up her villainy. That very afternoon, an envelope stamped with the HOA logo landed in my mailbox. I opened it and nearly laughed out loud. Official violation notice. Requirement: remove maple tree within 7 days. Failure to comply, $100 daily fine. The stated reason? Tree is diseased, hazardous, and detrimental to community aesthetics. My tree was lush and healthy. The only crime it had committed was existing in the wrong place in Karen's eyes. I immediately hired an arborist to take a look. He barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This tree is perfectly healthy. The only problem is it's been pruned incorrectly." I snapped photos, filed the report, and saved every page. My thought: fine, if she wants to play by the book, I'll play by the book. But Deborah didn't stop there. Monday morning, I opened my door to find a bright red notice plastered out front. Notice of removal. HOA order. At first glance, it looked like my house was about to be condemned and my tree sentenced to execution. That night, a neighbor texted me, "Hey, did you see Karen's post? She just put up photos of your tree in the HOA group." I checked my phone, and sure enough, there was my backyard, complete with the caption: "A prime example of disregard for community standards, endangering us all." And if that wasn't enough, the next day she went door to door warning families that my maple tree could fall and kill a child at any moment. Some neighbors started giving me looks, half curious, half pitying, as if I had a T-Rex chained up in the yard instead of a tree. The climax came when I stepped outside and found a brand new wooden sign staked into my lawn. "Unsafe tree, removal scheduled by HOA." I froze. My tree on my land had now been branded public enemy number 1. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. People say HOAs keep neighborhoods tidy, but here, it felt like I was trapped in a real-life episode of The Truman Show, with Karen as the director and me cast as the villain. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about branches anymore. This was a war of pride. And I had no intention of losing. 3 days later, I came back from a job site, turned onto my street, and my heart nearly dropped out of my chest. Parked in front of my house was a massive truck with sloppy painted letters that read, "Karen's Cut Rate Tree Service." The name alone screamed cheap trouble. And sure enough, this time they weren't just trimming a few branches. They were taking down the entire tree. My maple, my shade, my pride, was groaning and swaying under the roar of chainsaws. And who was standing there, arms crossed, sunglasses on, smirking like she'd scored VIP tickets to the hottest concert in town? Deborah Karen Winters. She looked like the director of a tragic suburban play, and I was the unwilling audience. I jumped out of my car, my voice cracking from rage. "Stop right now! That's my tree!" Deborah turned slowly, flashing me a paper stamped with the HOA logo, her voice dripping with triumph. "See this? I have the legal authority to remove this hazard. My signature's right there." I glanced down. Sure enough, one signature. Hers. No board vote, no verification. I looked back up and laughed coldly. "That's not a permit. That's a joke." Then I faced the workers, my tone sharp. "If you make one more cut, you and this woman will both be sued for destruction of property. I have legal documentation. I have a certified arborist report. You won't get away with this." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One quickly killed his saw, but it was already too late. The trunk had been cut 80% through. A heavy, splintering crack rang out, the sound of disaster, or maybe justice, about to happen. Karen kept her eyes on me, lips curled in disdain. "You'll regret interfering with the HOA. Crash! The whole street went silent. The massive maple toppled, the ground shuddering beneath its weight. And then, it didn't fall on my house. It didn't hit the workers. No, it landed with absolute precision, right on top of Deborah's shiny red BMW, the car she washed religiously every Sunday morning. Glass shattered like fireworks. The roof caved in. The frame buckled. I stood frozen, half in shock, half biting my lip to keep from laughing. Neighbors poured out of their houses, some already filming, whispering, "Oh my God, justice is real." Deborah's shriek tore through the air. "My car! Oh my God, my car! What have you done?" I folded my arms, calm as ever. "No, ma'am. This is what you've done. And in that moment, I knew. Nature itself had filed a complaint against Karen, loud and clear. The entire street went dead silent after that earth-shaking crash. I could still hear bits of glass tinkling onto the pavement. The tree workers froze for a few seconds, then quickly shut off their chainsaws and scrambled to pack up their gear, clearly desperate to vanish. I overheard one mutter, "She said she had authorization. How are we supposed to know?" No doubt, none of them wanted to spend another second tied to the disaster named HOA Karen. Deborah, though, was a different story. She lunged toward the crumpled red BMW, wailing as if she'd just witnessed a family funeral. Through sobs, she whipped out her phone and dialed her insurance company, her voice shrill. "Yes, my car's been crushed by the neighbor's tree. Yes, I hired workers. Yes, I signed the order. But I'm the HOA president. I have the authority. Hello, hello?" And then, silence. Deborah's face went pale, her hands trembling as she gripped the phone. It was obvious the insurance company had cut her off cold. Unauthorized permit, unauthorized work, self-inflicted mess. By then, the neighbors had spilled out into the street, half of them laughing, the other half recording videos. That's when Michael, an HOA board member, rushed over with two others. Their eyes widened at the scene. The massive maple sprawled across the BMW, Deborah stunned and frantic. I handed them the so-called authorization paper, complete with one lone signature, hers. They glanced at it, then shook their heads in unison. One of them spoke loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. "This is falsified. We need an emergency board meeting immediately." I stood there, arms crossed, feeling lighter than air. I didn't have to say a word. Deborah had turned herself into living proof of her own abuse of power. And this time, the whole neighborhood saw it with their own eyes. A week after that fateful day, I received a thick envelope stamped with bold certified mail. I opened it and nearly burst out laughing. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board, noticeably without Deborah's signature, beginning with the words, "We sincerely apologize for the incident that occurred." Tucked inside was a check for nearly $20,000, compensation for the unlawful removal of a mature maple tree, plus landscaping restoration costs. Staring at the figure, I felt a mix of surprise and deep satisfaction. After all the theatrics, at last the law, and maybe nature itself, had sided with me. But that wasn't all. Also enclosed was the official record of an emergency meeting. The board had unanimously voted to remove Deborah Winters from her position as HOA president. Reading that line, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift off my shoulders. It felt as though the shadow that had hung over the entire neighborhood had finally dissipated. That afternoon, I sat on my porch, sipping iced tea, savoring a peace I hadn't felt in months. Just then, a sleek SUV with a giant rental car sticker crept into Deborah's driveway. The door opened, and out stepped Deborah herself. Still hiding behind those oversized sunglasses, but her posture no longer carried even a trace of authority. She glanced in my direction for only a split second before ducking her head and hurrying inside. I raised my glass slightly, offering the smallest nod of neighborly courtesy. Even through the dark lenses, I could see her flinch. I took another slow sip of tea and smiled. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom or a lawyer. Sometimes all it takes is a tree and the perfect fall. Looking back, I realized the maple tree in my backyard was never just a tree. It was a boundary between my land and my neighbors, between lawful authority and self-appointed power, between human patience and the arrogance of someone drunk on control. Karen could quote every clause from that 32-page covenant, slap bright red notices on my door, and turn the neighborhood group chat into her personal stage. But in the end, she forgot one simple truth. The laws of nature need no signatures, no board votes, and they show no mercy. The maple filed its own complaint on my behalf, toppling squarely onto the shiny red BMW Karen cherished most. With that fall, nature delivered its verdict. You can bend rules, but you can never escape justice, especially when it comes crashing down from above. I took a long sip of iced tea and let out a satisfied breath. Somewhere down the street, children's laughter rang out. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt truly peaceful again. And I thought to myself, sometimes, to protect peace, you don't need to fight. You just need to trust that sooner or later, nature will speak for you.